there was a time when we entered one of the buildings, and we were filming behind the police, and then one of the police shouted "grenade," and we all we ran out of there, and indeed there was an exploded grenade, and we were packed in there, 20, 30 guys, cameras, guns, people being taken out of the building and being taken to safety. What if that thing had gone off? So it was a very scary day for me. It was.
I would think that you would say the Al-Shabaab story. Like,
I mean, it was scary for you to watch. For us, it was
Peace and blessings, everybody. I am your brother Orina, all the way from the motherland, all the way from Kenya, Nairobi, nation's capital, and welcome to Sell Afrika to Africans. Well, today, guys, I'm starstruck, okay, for the first time. Okay, well, not for the first time, because I've had a couple of people who I've been looking up to for so long, and this is one of them. The J, you see that letter J in the word journalism stands for John Allan Namu. This man, no, I'm serious. This man has been through everything. The best investigative journalist, the best journalist, period, I've ever seen. He is at this point, John. You're a Kenyan statesman, and like you have been through so much. You haven't pioneered investigative journalism, but you've taken it to a whole other level, to a point whereby it's like this man has been through so much. He has shown us a lot of things. He has uncovered a lot of things here in Kenya, and even right now in Africa with Afrikans, but also in Africa for a very, very, very long time. And today I'm really honored to have him on the show. So please welcome John Allan Namu. John, how are you doing?
I'm good, Orina. Thank you very much for having me on your platform. Na pole sana kwa kuchelewa, as I told you. Family, so as it gets in the way, but I appreciate it. Hey, your intro, man, you've laid it on thick, man. But thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that.
You are like in the Mount Rushmore of the best journalists I've ever seen.
Basi tuseme Kilimanjaro, achana na Rushmore.
Okay, yeah. The Mount Kilimanjaro of like you. I mean, the truths you've uncovered in you and of course Muhammad Ali, in Jicho Pevu, and now with Africa Uncensored. Like, one thing that has always stayed consistent with you is the urge of uncovering the truths.
Yeah.
But one thing that I've always wanted to know is where it came from. Like, where did that urge come from to always uncover the truth that nobody, that people are probably scared to uncover?
Orina, and I apologize. I don't know how old you are, right? So I'm assuming you're in your 20s, right?
Oh, I'm 25.
25. Great. So actually, that's a question that I should be asking you, because you and your generation have really shown us what courage means, right? By and large. But to answer your question, I'd say that it's a muscle that you build, right? Like it's something that doesn't happen overnight. Getting the courage to speak out, getting the courage to do the work that we've done consistently. It's something that it starts and it builds over a long period of time, so that when you arrive at certain moments in your life when you're doing these things, and it almost comes, I don't say naturally, but it's the weight of knowing that there's a consequence after speaking the truth isn't as heavy as it used to be. Then that happens over time. And the reason that I was asking you about your age, obviously, I've watched what happened with the protests last year, and a lot of the ways in which young guys are moving this year and going forward. And this isn't just in Kenya, this is globally, right?
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of courage in your generation that I think can't be, it really can't be ignored. So, but for us, we had to build it over time. Yeah.
Before we go to Kenyan politics and Kenyan corruption going on and everything, and also I'd like us to touch on the Kenya-U.S. health deal because there's some shenanigans going on there. But before we go there, I just want to, because let me tell you, when I was a kid, when we used to come, and you and Muhammad Ali just going, especially that Al Shabaab story. I mean, it was like, is that the most, let me say, the most difficult story you've ever done, or are there others? Yeah.
Well, I think, it was one of the most challenging that we had done at that time, right? I was listening to this podcast about Stevie Wonder, and there's a really nice analogy that I heard, that sometimes when you interact with someone's work at a certain point in time, you'll think, well, wow, oh my gosh, and then to akuonyeshe now some of the things that they've done before and the things that they've done since, and your mind is blown. And I think our work, at least at that time, was a little bit like that, in that anybody who was interacting with our work at that point in time must have thought, these guys are crazy, right? But it started with smaller investigations, stuff just out on the streets in Nairobi that now, TikTokers are doing. These things of watu wa kusanya masimu, we started with stuff like that. Con men in town, like I remember Moha, one of Moha's first investigations, and I didn't do that one with him, was about a sex shop in Nairobi. I think it was either on Luthuli somewhere. And this is, you see, today you see these things being sold online, right? But like that's 2006, that was scandalizing, like to a lot of people. So even those ones were crazy, right? And I remember the newsroom was on fire because of the stuff that he had done. And I think about it now and how certain things have become normalized. And I was like, like back when we had started, that was just insane. So I mean, to answer your question, at the time it was significantly difficult because first, I think the point of view that we were coming at the Al Shabaab stories that we did. So first of all, looking into Shabaab and what they had done, but also looking at the other side, which was a lot of the extrajudicial executions that took place. At that time, and I'd say even today, there still are some people who don't yet have an appreciation for the fact that if you use certain methods to be able to eliminate your enemies, right? It's a very short step before they start being used on regular citizens, right? And we learned this from the stories that we did about the Mungiki, this is 2006, 2007, 2008, where, John Michuki, when he was internal security minister, after a number of killings that took place in Kariobangi, in Nyeri, different parts of the country, especially around central Kenya, unleashed the Mungiki unleashed the police on the Mungiki, right? This is 2006. I remember one story that we did. It was a news report where the police, led by the Nairobi provincial, commander, right, went and surrounded Kosovo, that section of Mathare, and in the valley, and nobody would come in or leave without the police's say so. And we watched them as everybody was told walale chini. Like looking at it, a picture of it, and looking at some of the pictures from colonial Kenya, it was exactly the same, with police with their rifles standing over, the citizenry, looking for purported criminals. Some of them were, but then what would happen is that one person would be identified from among the people that were lying down, taken into an alley. You hear a couple of gunshots, and then you see police coming out with somebody in blood-stained sheets. So you know what happened. I remember doing a stand-up in front of one of these police vehicles, because I had noticed that there was something dripping from the bottom of the car. So it looked like, the way it's like you can have leaking engine oil, right? That's what it looked like. But it wasn't oil, it was the blood of all of the people who had been dumped inside that police vehicle. And so when you see these kinds of things, and you don't see any or very little by the way of a response in terms of saying, look, while it's clear that we have a problem with criminal gangs, etc., isn't there another way that we can be doing this where you're not just killing everybody, right? Like and anybody who had any links to the Mungiki on that day, those guys were wiped off of the face of the earth. And that kind of reputation, not reputation, but that modus of the police continues to build, to the extent that when now the government has a problem with how the public are expressing themselves, guess what? That's the knee-jerk in terms of how those things are used. So just like the stories that, I know we started this with a question about, was this the most dangerous stories? I think we also have to look at some of the things in our society as things that have built over time, and some of the consequences that young people and generally people are suffering today began when these things started being normalized years ago, even way before I started, right? So someone like Patrick Shaw, this big policeman, this fat guy in the 80s who struck fear into the hearts of lots of people. If you think about it, really, he was like a cowboy, right? Where that if you mess with him, you might wind up in a mortuary. What is that saying about the way we treat, criminals? Like literally this morning I was watching something about one of the inscriptions that Mandela left at Robben Island. And he said that, a nation can only be judged by, you can't really understand a nation, and I'm paraphrasing, until you've been inside its prison cells, right? A nation isn't judged by how it treats its best, but how it treats the least. And the least many times are people that we don't have not just philosophical agreements with, we have actual really virulent and very strong opinions about. How do we treat those people? If we continue to treat those people in a way that we wouldn't agree with it, were that treatment turned on us, then you can tell what kind of society that we will become. And so Jichopevu and the Inside Story, I'd say, whereas we were investigating case by case various things that looked wrong, or when it comes to the law, when I look at the entire corpus of the work that we did, I think it was really asking this question, like, what kind of society are we, right? What kind of people are we? Should we allow for these things to go on? And I'd hope that at some point in time, maybe in my lifetime or maybe after I'm gone, people will look at the work that we've done and conclude that while it's not tidy and there might be mistakes that we've made, that we really were asking important, existential questions about ourselves, right? And we truly were a mirror. That's what I would hope. But history will judge which were the most important stories that we've done. I think now that I've had more time to reflect, I think it's not really a question that I can answer anymore, because the work that we do is not, it might be edifying for me, but it's really for the public to judge. So I've given you a long ass answer, but Yeah,
No,
hopefully.
no, no.
It makes sense.
That was deep.
Yeah.
And that's a very good place to start. Extrajudicial killings and
Yeah.
police misconduct here in this country. Last year it was crazy. I mean, and when you see this happening,
Mhm.
is this like of course we know what's happening. They're following the chain of command, and but even if we know all those reasons that the police are following the commanders who are telling them to shoot to kill, is this also a problem of poor police training? Because yeah, like, what do you think about that?
That's a good question, and I think a part of it, yes, does have something to do with our police training curriculum, but I'd say it's deeper than that, right? Because when you look at some of the laws that the police have relied on to justify some of the actions that they've taken, and what the root of those laws is, you go back to the penal code, and when it was passed as a law in Kenya, and you go back to certain policing acts, and when they were passed in Kenya, they were passed in the colonial period, right? And very little in terms of the law has changed with policing. I mean, there have been significant changes with regard to the police service, and some of the mechanisms that exist internally for the police to be accountable internally as well as externally. IPOA, for all of its shortcomings, is a big step change in terms of how people look at the police. But if you want to understand policing in Kenya and writ large in many parts of Africa, then you have to look at what policing was for, in the colonial period, and whether that has really changed, right? And so policing in Kenya was, and in fact, if you look back, the administration police, their ancestry, right, if I was to call it that, would be, the police who are, they weren't even called the police, I'm forgetting the term, but they were the police that were assigned to chiefs and that sort of thing to collect hard tax. They then become the administration police. Then the Kenya police, the CID, all of that, the more professional, cadre of police officers were then now to police other races, where more intelligent policing, etc., is supposed to be applied, right? But then when you go into independence, there's like a mixing of both, and a pollution, one, in both ways, but largely in terms of the methods of policing of Africans by the force. That becomes by and large how the force has enforced itself on the public, right? So we can point at bad training and say that, well, if the police were better trained, they might do this. But a culture is something that is built over time, over habits, over, so my view is that there has to be a much deeper like effort to clean up policing in the country. And it will, my guesses are that, yes, you need to deal with the curriculum, what happens with Kiganjo, the approach that police, have, not this, Rayani Adui approach that many police officers have. There's also pay, but the culture of policing certainly has to change, and I'd say that if for my money, this would be the best time to do it, because there are a lot more police officers who are better trained, who are more exposed, but who also are yearning for a new culture, inside the police force, right? So we have this constitution, we have the laws, we have whatever, but the culture of policing is sometimes far stronger than any law that you could enforce. And then finally, the purpose of the police force has always to be to serve the elite in power. So the police might be independent in name, but in its actions, it serves a certain, cadre or a certain layer in our society, right? And that being the political elite, specifically the political elite within the executive, right? These are the people who are the most protected. These are the people who, if a crime takes place, or things are going to be solved in 2 days, right? But you look at how policing is applied to everybody else, and you can see it's very clear that there still is like an umbilical cord that's tied between the elite and the police. And for any changes in policing to take place, that umbilical cord has to be severed. Like the police has to be for everybody, utumishi kwa wote, and no, not utumishi kwa wote wenye wakona pesa. You get? Yeah, utumishi kwa wale wenye wamekuwa marais ama wabunge or whatever. Utumishi kwa wote, and that's something that I'd say we all need to be like really, really pushing for, especially your generation, because you guys are the majority, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. And I like the way you got into the root of the problem, which, it's funny how colonialism is still a part of us. And I always say it on the show, John, we are still under colonialism in some shape, way or fashion. Like we are still our social life, our economic, our politics is heavily influenced by colonialism, what people call now neo-colonialism. Now, if we can shift into politics right now, it's crazy. Well, now I think we can touch on the health. What are people getting it wrong with the Kenya-U.S. health deal? Like, are people getting it wrong when they say that our health data is being sold to the U.S. Or are people actually on the money when it comes to this issue? Yeah.
So I don't know if you had seen it, but I actually wrote something about the health data pacts, and for me, what I was saying is that the pacts themselves don't really speak to, outrightly the sale of our data, but it's the ambiguity, the lack of clarity around those clauses that should protect our data, especially in the data pact, right? Not just the cooperation framework, right? That we should be wary of. And why I was saying that we should be wary of this is because if you look at the United States national security strategy and its approach to Africa, but also how it speaks about Black people and brown people when it's talking about security pacts with regard to Europe, then you start to understand some of the thinking behind what possibly will emerge from these kinds of pacts. First of all, if these pacts truly were for Africans, right, I'd say whereas the data pacts might have some similarities, there'd be vast differences between the pact that we sign as Kenya and the pact that we sign as Uganda and the pact that they sign as Lesotho, etc. But by and large, from what we're hearing, it looks like it's almost like a template that's just being shifted, like a PDF that's being sent to all of the country WhatsApp groups across Africa and told to sign, right? And that should tell you something, right? Like, so if this is the approach, where is the nuance beyond just changing the name? Kufuta jina uandike Uganda ama uandike Lesotho ama uandike, right? Like, where's the difference? Where are the needs of those particular communities and populations represented within the pacts that they are signing? Yeah. Secondly, just to go back to this thing about the security strategy, Like the security strategy needs to be taken seriously, because this is not just like Trump, going out and posting a message on Truth Social or on X, where it can be said that hii ni maoni ya rais na huu rais ni ni wazimu. No, it is a strategy document for the United States, like meaning that it is policy that they will deal with Europe, especially when it comes to the NATO pact, with a certain posture that is that you guys need to fix this whole cultural, erasure. This what are they calling it? The great replacement theory that they are pushing, right? And who are the people who are pushing this great replacement theory? A lot of it is being funded and underpinned by a lot of big tech bros, like very strong, very powerful, very wealthy people within the digital, ecosystem. If that is how they look at people of African descent or people of Asian descent, anybody who does not look like them, then it stands to reason that the protection of our data rights will likely be an afterthought. And then secondly, whereas a lot of people have, pointed at the fact that, USAID, CDC, all of these people have held our data for years, and many of the things that have been happening with African health data. Then why is it that Trump scrapped some of these organizations, unless now he's saying that the same methodology that they were using is what we are going to adopt, right? And secondly, because it was happening in the past, and it likely was, and our data was still being stolen, doesn't mean that we shouldn't speak about it today, right? If someone was stealing from you yesterday and you didn't know, and today you find out that now not only is it someone, it is the government that is stealing from you, should you say, because they stole from us yesterday, we should shut up about it? No, right?
Yeah.
Stealing is still stealing. Whether you were made aware of it yesterday or you were made aware of it today, it's important for us to start to ring the alarms. And especially now when these pacts have not been, solidified. I'd say, data pacts, that kind of cooperation will likely be things that we will see going forward, right? Because we are in an age where, data is an important part of any economic model, right? But it doesn't need to be the kind of pacts that are purely extractive, that benefit, benefit profit and large capital, right? Like if it is capital that you're extracting from me, what is it that you're giving me as a service? Where is my agency to say, no, you can take this data, but not this data? And there are models around the world for how these things can take place. That's why I was citing Estonia as an example. It's not a perfect model, but they have, like, an Estonian citizen has agency over the health data that they have. And they can tell a doctor, I don't want you to see this kind of data. I don't want you to see this, or you can have this. You understand?
Yeah.
And if data is currency, then shouldn't we also be able to hold currency? Currency shouldn't just be in the hands of the elite. That's feudalism, right? That's techno-feudalism. So that's what I'm trying to say. So you might not find like fingerprints of like an explicit line where it says our health data is going to be sold to Palantir or to Amazon or to Alphabet or whichever company, right? But it is the entire framework that we need to look at. Is this kind of pact going to benefit the citizen from which the data that we're looking at is going to be taken from, right? The data belongs even by our own laws, right? Yeah. The government is just a data processor. You get? It's holding data on behalf of us. We are the data owners. So we must have we must have some sort of say in what takes place. And that's really all I'm saying.
Yeah, I always say there's danger in ambiguity, DID. Danger,
exactly.
No, DIA.
DIA,
In
yeah.
It like if they're ambiguous, then like, for example, I saw the PS and the CS of health, Duale,
Yeah.
saying, no, everything is good. You can trust us. We are professionals and all this. And I'm like, fine, yeah,
And
good. You are professional.
so let me give you actually another example of that whole rubric that they're using. You can trust us. We are government. We are responsible. You can come. If anything happens, you come and see me, right? In 2014, Kenya got into a deal with about 5 companies for the supply of medical equipment, the managed equipment leasing scheme, right? We were leasing medical equipment for the treatment or the diagnosis of various, diseases. Now, it always starts with virtue signaling. We have a problem. We are trying to we're proffering this solution, and this solution is important. And anybody who fights this solution is an enemy of the republic. This is exactly, the approach that was used during the managed equipment lease when they were trying to push the managed equipment leasing scheme. What came after that? What came after that were agreements that had been entered into before governors from various counties had their say, right? Before health committees had even looked at the managed equipment leasing scheme. So they already had an agreement, and then now they were trying to, retrofit all of the kind of processes that should have taken place so that, it passes the smell test legally. What then happened after that? They forced these things down the throats of county governments across the country, with the exception of Isaac Ruto's county. I don't know if you remember, in 2014, he was the only governor who didn't sign, right, that health agreement. And he was lambasted. He was lambasted, by I remember Duale at the time. He was a majority leader, and he was like, why are you so angry about this money? Hii pesa si ya mama yako, right? You remember that? You remember that soundbite, right? And what was happening on the ground was that county governments were receiving medical equipment that they did not have the capacity to use. There were, before you install a certain machine, you need the right kind of electricity. You need the right kind of housing. If you're installing machinery for an ICU unit, you need ICU nurses, right? Now, if you don't have ICU nurses and you have the equipment, that equipment is just as useful as a brick.
Yeah.
And we paid for all of that equipment. And another thing that they said is that, no, the counties are not going to pay, right? But every year the counties were paying. Every year the counties were paying. Yeah. And this kind of virtue signaling, followed by, ramming things down people's throats, and then now just, saying, it's a fait accompli, we might as well just move. This is a kind of methodology that, especially when it comes to these big projects, it's being normalized, right? It's important to ask the questions before everything is settled. And it's not out of a hatred for specific people in the regime. It's just out of an abundance of caution. An abundance of caution is good when you're dealing with things that are going to be that expensive, but more so when you're dealing with things that are going to be that expensive, and the people who are proffering the solutions are people who have shown themselves not to be trustworthy in these kinds of situations. So when people are questioning, they're right to question. Not only is it their right, they are right to question these things. So that's why I'm saying that these kinds of things, muwe macho, right? And it's not just investigative journalists. And thankfully, this is now something that is being owned by the public, right? It's not just the job of journalism to do this. It is everybody's job, right? Eternal vigilance. Eternal vigilance. That's what that means, The cost of freedom is eternal vigilance. It means that lazima uwe macho kila siku.
Yeah.
And if somebody is tired or slips up or is unable to do that, then somebody has to stand in the gap for them. That is how a society of values is built, when everybody recognizes that my responsibility is to do this, because if I don't do this, my people suffer and I suffer, right? That's how you build a culture of accountability. You don't build a culture of accountability by saying, well, we have the law, now follow the law, and then you go away and wait for people to follow the law. They'll never will if the incentive to follow the law is not enforced by vigilance. They never will.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, anything that Trump does is so transactional. Like
Exactly.
he, 1.6 billion just like that. I mean, no, there has to be something that he has to, you know, to take in return. Like nothing
But
is free when it comes
think about it. Think about it this way, right? It's $1.6 billion. Sounds like a lot of money, right? But what is the valuation of OpenAI right now? Like when they were selling their shares and what have you, it was $500 billion. That is one artificial intelligence company. One company, right? So the economy around the digital economy, the AI economy, etc., is massive, right? To the extent that that money that is being given, and it's being given over a number of years, it's not being given upfront. Right? That money is being broken down, and we also are paying our way. Now, interestingly, that's the part of it that I have the least problems with. I think that for us to have a healthcare system that is independent, we must also pay for it. We must own it. You get? That's a part of the agreement that I don't have a problem with. But being dazzled by $1.6 billion, but not looking at the person who's giving you, that is a pittance compared to the kind of money that they're spending in terms of war for, you know, in the Ukraine or in Palestine or what have you. It's nothing, right? So we can't get dazzled by a few coins here to believe that the US has our interests at heart. It doesn't, right? It does not. And then look at the kind of expertise that they're supposedly giving. Yes, the United States is fantastic at research, etc. But why is it that we don't think that that capacity to be able to build these systems exists internally? We have some of the best trained doctors across Africa, not just doctors, but also epidemiologists, people who were in 2014, 2015, who had gone to West Africa to deal with the Ebola crisis, people who have been trained by looking at Marburg in Uganda, by looking at Ebola and its spread in the DRC, right? Those people are here. And even if they're not in Kenya, they're also in Uganda, they're also in the DRC, right? So if this expertise exists here, why aren't we then calling for that expertise? If we truly are an African, state, why aren't we not calling our African brothers and sisters to say, help us build this system? We can share this system with one another. Why is this not an initiative of the African Union to then now build the kind of healthcare and surveillance systems that are required across the continent, right? Why aren't they the ones who are driving this initiative? Remember, Ruto said Trump came to us. Now, we have had a plan. We have had a plan to streamline our healthcare system that predates these agreements, right? I've had a look at it. I think and to tie to Taifa Healthcare, the social health, SHA, etc. So that plan exists. Maybe funding the plan is a problem, right? But is this the only way that we can do it? And are they the only partners, right? And it's not to say that the United States is an inherently bad partner. But don't just go there and take a deal that has been already crafted and you don't have any say and it's a take it or leave it deal. No. Have a backbone. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and have room for negotiation. You can't just especially that's weird. I didn't know that. So they came to us. That's suspicious. Like
go and look at the sound bites that Ruto was when Ruto was talking about it. He's like, yeah, these people came to us with this deal. Really?
Something's up. But I guess we'll see when time goes by. But immediately I saw it, I was like, for me as a Pan-African, I've always been like, what is wrong with us Africans? Like, we are trusting the same America, the same America that did the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Until this day, there is little to no accountability to what happened in Tuskegee.
I want to say that we ought to be suspicious, but we also have to be realistic about, the state of the world and the state of affairs, and knowing that sometimes we will have to deal with bad people or people who do not have our interests at heart. This is just the nature of the world and of politics, right? We can try, as I've said, to look for the kinds of partners that most align with our values, most align with our goals, right? But we should know that there will come a day and a time that we will have to deal with people that are highly transactional, who possibly don't have our interests at heart. The question is, how do we deal with these people, right? How do we deal with them in a way that protects our interests and protects the way that, protects our futures, right? And of America writ large, America is not one thing. Yeah, and I think I've gone an even deeper appreciation for that now that I'm here. It's not one thing. There are very many people who believe differently than Trump does, right? And they are also having their own cultural crises around the world. So you also have to take into account that there's also a reckoning that's taking place here that could very well change the way the United States, the West deals with Africa in the future. Maybe this is me being, cautiously optimistic, but I think there's also that to appreciate. And then finally, when we look at the way colonialism and neocolonialism has affected us, we also have to be careful not to stay in a posture of victimhood, right? Don't always say that these things will happen to us, right? And this is why I keep on talking about vigilance. You have to be careful that these things don't happen to us again. But the other side of vigilance is you also have to have a sense of agency, right? Like a sense of dignity, that I also have my own way and my own approach of dealing with things. And it might be different than what I see out there, but it is mine, right? And I will stand by it. For all of its shortcomings, an example of something like that is Ujamaa, right? When Nyerere was talking about, freedom and independence, and the challenge of independence being now that everybody is going to start looking at the state and not looking at African interests. In a sense, he was right. And then now applying Ujamaa inside his own borders, it then now gave our neighbors a completely different appreciation for the place of tribe in their cultural mix, as opposed to what happened here, right? And so, you think about, I was reading something about Bildad Kagia yesterday, and how Kenyatta was lambasting him for saying, you Kagia, you're always complaining, but look at you, you have nothing. We fought independence so that we can also own things, right? That wasn't why we fought for independence. And Kagia fighting for the prurient interest and being one of those people who exercised vigilance in his life was then demonized by the powers that be. And what I'm saying is, at a certain point in time, we also have to recognize that if there's a certain way in which we want to live, we have to stand up for that. We have to create the kind of future that we want to live in. Yeah? Because it's not going to be created for us. right? The values that we are hoping that will be reflected in our relationships with the United States, etc., are not going to come from them. They have to be reflected in how we move, right? So just bringing this back home, yeah, and to, I don't know if I'm jumping the gun, Orina, here, but to the conversation we're having in Kenya ahead of our elections, and this whole thing about Gen Z and that, you know, I don't want to plug that I was writing about this, but I have written about this, right? What's happening is that the values of the state are showing you what the future is going to be. It's going to be largely dystopian. They are creating the kind of legal framework for an authoritarian approach to governance of Kenya. This is how I see it, right? Many of the laws that are being passed, many of the partners that they are choosing, look at all of that, and then you can see that there's a, and then also this whole proffering of I'm the one with the solution, right? Like to have a leader who is almost messianic, it tells you that the reliance is not on they're looking at a, you know, at a pyramid in terms of their approach to how this country is led, that the solution can only come from up there, yeah. But is this reflective of the values that are stated in our constitution? The constitution, in the first, you know, the first few lines says that we gave this constitution to ourselves. Nobody gave it to us, meaning that we wrote it together. Yeah. And if that's a declaration of the future that we want to live in, what does that look like in terms of the way we approach our laws, the way we approach one another, the way we drive on our roads, the way we vote in our elections, the vigilance that we have in our election cycle, this thing of saying, oh, they are goons, and then saying, oh, no, you know, like, what are we going to do? If there are goons that are ruining the future that you want to live in, what are you going to do about those goons? You understand? Like, what are you going to do about those people who are continually interfering with this vision that we all signed up to? This is the time to say, this is what we are going to do. Because if we don't do anything and we complain about it, we will be doomed to live in the future that is created by the people who are currently holding the instruments of power, who are currently, adjacent to power. You get?
Yeah.
In other words, I am saying, if you want to live in a good country in Kenya, you have to say and declare very specifically. Don't be ambiguous about it. We're talking about ambiguity in the health pacts. Don't be ambiguous about the kind of country you want to live in. Say this is how this country should look, right? According to this document that we signed, this is how this country should look. This is how we want to go forward. And remember, even them, they say, power is never given, it is taken. You take that power. You understand? Take it. I'm saying this because, frankly, my time as a person who can chart the destiny of the country is very limited. I'm not in the majority. Yeah. And I'm not necessarily saying take it through violence. No. Right? What are the ideas that we are giving? How persuasive are these ideas? You have to go out and try and persuade people to do things. And there are certain things that tell me that this is starting to happen. There's a young man who is going to simplify the constitution and go around the country, right? And he's trying to make the constitution a part of our curriculum. That is him telling you, me, I want to live in a country where all of the children in our republic know what their rights are from the day that they enter school, right? There's another two people who, young guys who are this initiative called VAR, who are going around the country making sure that people get their voters cards. What they're actually saying is that I want to live in a country where young people appreciate that in order to change the political system, you have to vote. You get? So these are the kinds of declarations that we must make, and not just make them, but bring them into reality, like bring them into breathe life into them by doing the work that needs to be done. That is the difference between countries that live within neocolonial systems that accept that neo-colonial system, and countries that live within neo-colonial systems that want to get out of these neo-colonial systems. To me, I humbly submit.
Yeah, it's up to us.
Exactly.
It's really up to us to change. Like Michael Jackson said, take a look at yourself and then make that change. So, and speaking about voting, and I have a voting card, but I speak to Gen Zs almost every day.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why they're not getting the voting card the way we expected them to get. I mean, there's just jadedness going on. Because you know what they're saying? They're like, sita ibiwa tu. They're like will be stolen either way. So what do you say to that mentality that, like to them, they're just like, it's just going to be the way it has always been.
So there's the article that I'd mentioned to you. I'll share it with you after this. And the title of the article is "It's not apathy, it's evidence." Right. So I'm looking at it in this way. What they are saying by not going to and I might be wrong, but what they're saying when they're not going to vote to pick up their voters' cards is that exactly that these systems that you guys are depending on to be able to save us have failed the country before. Yeah, the IBC has been chronically underfunded, and then right before an election they are pumped with cash to the extent that they're not able to procure properly. Then there's a corruption scandal around procurement, and then the machines don't work because people haven't been trained, and then people's votes aren't counted. When young people are talking about there being voter apathy, right? What they're saying is that yes, these systems are not just imperfect, but they have been made not to function, right, in the past, and we've seen that. And I can't disagree with them because I personally have looked into elections in various ways, from covering the violence in 2007 as a young reporter to trying to actually count the votes in 2013 after 2014, actually after the 2013 vote, to look into the minutes of meetings from the 2017 election, to interviewing Chris Msando a month before he died. So I'm not saying that, I'm not saying this out of just casual observation. I understand what they mean when they say that these systems aren't working. And also, how the police have been brutalizing young people since the protest, but even before the protest. If we're honest, this is something that has happened with young people for a long, long time. But then, you see, again, this is the problem with the situation in which we're in. If you choose to withdraw, right? Unfortunately, you can't withdraw from being a Kenyan. At least a majority of the young people don't have the money to leave, right? They don't have the capacity to just get up and go and say, this is not my country, I'm not going to. Yeah. So by saying that, yes, Iwataiba, it means that you are giving up yet another piece of your future by not showing up. Right? Wataiba. But yes, wakiiba leo, and then tomorrow waibe tena, that's 5 years of your life gone. Right? Then another 5 years of your life. Before you know it, you're a parent or you're up in age, right? And your life will have passed you by with you having said that, yeah, I didn't stand up because the people who were in power kept on stealing. But the cure for injustice is justice. Like you have to at some point in time plant your flag in the sand and say no more. No, it can't keep happening, right? And unfortunately, right, like I wish this wasn't the situation, but unfortunately every generation, right, has a duty, it has a task, right? Was it fun on who said it, right? You either fulfill it or abandon it. And these are the things that we are faced with today. So saying that voting is useless is also saying it in some way that my future is not worth fighting for. If this is a methodology that we have chosen as a country, we've settled on in how we're going to choose our leaders, right? What we are saying is that then we start to exercise our power directly, as it said in the Constitution, or indirectly through our leaders. And indirectly is the method that we have chosen so far. What method are you choosing when you don't get up and vote? What future are you choosing for yourself? It's hard for a young person to think that far into the future because, the thing about youth is that you think that you have time. Bro, but you don't have time.
You don't.
Look, I'll give you an example, right? When I got married, I was 26 years old. And just yesterday, a cousin of mine proposed to his girlfriend, right? And he was 13 when I got married, right? This is a man who is just about to start his family. In the blink of an eye, he was the age of my our third born, when he got when I got married. So this time goes in a flash, and I'm thinking about plans for university for our kids. Bro, 13 years ago, what was I thinking about? Right? So this time it goes. And if you really want to live in a country of your dreams, then you have to start working for that today. And sadly, what many of us have been reduced to is just fighting for our existence. And I understand why that's a difficult enough fight. Yeah. This is why we all have to do it together. To be able to shoulder the additional challenge of building the country of our dreams, it can't be on the shoulders of just a few people. It has to be on everybody's shoulders, right? And then also to recognize that it's not just the youth. I mean, the youth will be the real beneficiaries of a great future, but this thing is also intergenerational. This is why when people were marching on the street, it wasn't just, Gen Z's 18 to 24-year-olds. There were 30-year-olds, there were 40-year-olds, there were people in their 60s, and even those guys in their 60s were saying, Sisi kama Gen Z. It was a rallying call, right? You understand? And an appreciation that when giving ourselves the future that we want, there are also people who have lived in this country who also want a taste of that future. Yeah. So that's what I would say. Apathy is one thing, and looking at the state of play is one thing, but saying that we need to figure this thing out together is for me, it's the better way of looking at things. Because if we don't, then we're doomed to stay here. And every iteration of leadership that will come after will be progressively worse. And it'll become harder and harder to change the country.
I'd like 2027 to be almost like a 2002 moment when Moi was giving out power. You see, it was like almost the whole country was in the right direction. And let's say Moi wanted to steal the election. I'm sure even me, I'm just assuming. I'm sure even him, he was like, man, even if I steal, everybody will know. There has to be some logic when you're stealing an election. Because you look at your support base, you'll do your estimations, and you'll be like, okay.
And Ikiba hapa, it'll be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's like 90% against my 10%. So, and what do you think about, recently you saw the by-elections, how violent it was, how disorganized it was. It was a mess.
Yeah.
And to me, I think that that's a microcosm of how the general election will look like.
Well, I'd say it could be, and in some places it will be like that, right? Because I haven't been, at least, my experience covering elections, there's not one election that I've, even in 2013, right? There's not one election that hasn't had some violence, that hasn't had this kind of, but again, it's almost like a warning. I'd look at it more as a warning than as, this thing that then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we want the kind of disorganized, violent, and sadistic politics that we currently have to continue, then we let people who are interested in and benefit from that kind of politics control the narrative, right? To go around saying, oh, 2-term, 1-term, oh, Singapore, oh, high cousins, oh, sisi kama Mount Kenya, ama sisi kama Waluya, ama sisi kama nani. Let those guys run the show if that's the future that you want. So I look at it more as a warning than an actual, glimpse of the future, right? It's a current state of play. And I say that because, again, I don't want to lean too heavily on this moment, but the Gen Z protest taught us something about ourselves, right? That we can rewrite our future, right? Like, we can rewrite it. We can demand for certain things to happen, and if we are committed enough and consistent enough, then those things will happen. For instance, if the IEBC is talking about being chronically underfunded now, and it is the IEBC that we have, and we might not trust it, then we say, before we have any election, then, the IEBC must be reformed. Yeah? Or if we say that we then trust the IEBC, we push these guys to find the money to fund the IEBC, make voter registration continuous, change the law so that people with identity cards can vote, whatever it is that people want. This is something that you are well within your power to do, and you can pressure those guys within the legislature to do it. Yeah, but right now they're sitting pretty thinking, hiyo kitu ya Gen Z ilikuwa tu mwaka moja na iliisha, right? That is what wasting historical opportunities looks like. Yeah, so I look at it more as a warning than an actual sort of, glimpse into the future. At least that's how I'm choosing to look at it. And again, I might be too hopeful for some people's tastes, but this is how I view it, right? You want to change things, you've been given the warnings. But then also look at another thing. Look at the amount of energy and effort and money that was expended to win such, in the grand scheme of things, such nothing races, right? Those members of parliament are going to be members of parliament for how long? 18 months? The MCAs, right?
Yeah.
In the scheme of things, the races themselves don't mean much, right? But history ya kupimana nguvu is what the story was about. But if you have to spend, if an entire deputy president has to go and camp in one constituency to secure one seat for 18 months, what is it telling you about the state of security that they feel? So you could look at it that way. Yeah. But the other way you could look at it is, if the country is so decidedly against the status quo, then why didn't those elections go the way people thought that they would? So there's ways to look at this, and you could slice it one way or another. That's why I'm saying, for me, it's more a warning than it is, a prophecy of how things are going to happen. And there still is time to write a different story.
Well, you know, I didn't know that, you know, you interviewed Chris Msando a few weeks before he passed away. That's crazy. And it goes to show you, and I always said it, and even when I interviewed Professor Pielo Lumumba, we talked about it. There's no reason why you should kill somebody because of power. Like, you're not going to be there forever. You're going to be there for the next 5 to 10 years. Look at Tanzania. Look at like, I always get disgusted when I see people literally doing whatever it takes, including killing people to remain or to get power. I've never understood that.
I get that point of view. I get that it's just completely immoral for someone to have to die because of another person's pursuit of power. But think for a moment what the person who is looking at the power itself, think about how they think, right? Do they think of lives in the same terms as we do? Right? If you think about every person who's used violence to get to power in the past or in the present, do they think of lives in the same way that we do? Right? Or is it an assumption that people in power have this value for the life of the common person in the same way that we do? I don't think so. Yeah, you can call it a sociological, a mental disorder, but it's been proven time and again across history that violence as a route to power then means that the individual's life is reduced to either a statistic, an obstacle, etc. And there are so many obstacles that you have to be able to get through, and the objective is to get through them and then use the power to then create a narrative around which you can then logicize why those people died, right? So that for me is part of the logic of power. The logic of power means that you have the ability to then characterize those deaths as, oh, unfortunate, or oh, needless, or oh, a few, or they were just mistakes. And let me give you an example, right? Every time there's been a police killing across the mid 20 years that I've been a journalist and before, the police have always characterized it as, it's a few bad apples, right? It's a few bad apples who executed the Mungiki and then went and executed the killer squad of the people who went and killed the Mungiki. It's a few bad apples who pointed directly at protesters during the 2007 election and shot directly into the crowd, and then went and changed the logs in the police station to reflect that someone else had the guns that they were holding. It was a few bad apples who in the lead up to the ICC cases disappeared and possibly murdered witnesses. It was a few bad apples that in when was this? In prosecuting the war against terror, killed hundreds of young people, dumped them in national parks. It was a few bad apples who in the 2017 election then went and picked up Chris Msando and his companion Caroline and tortured them. It was a few bad apples who then went onto the streets to shoot people. In fact, one of the presidential candidates even said that there were no live rounds that were being used. There was a few bad apples who dumped people in Tana River, in Wasonyiro, in Ribayala. It was a few bad apples, it was a few bad apples, or a few bad apples. At what point in time will they accept that it's not the apple, but it's the barrel that has a problem, right? You understand? You understand the analogy that I'm trying to make. So when you look at what the purpose of power is, it is to continually write a narrative that they can shape, right? They can shape the narrative. They can shape the story. even now, that story about what happened in Gen Z is being reshaped. A few guys died, but there are people who are being held accountable, right? Really? Is that the truth? Yeah. That there was a protest last year. Actually, a friend of mine, a business journalist, sent me a clip where he was interviewing John Buddy. And Buddy then says that there were no protests in 2025 related to the finance bill. And I was like, that's interesting. But you see, this is why, in the face of the quest for power, the solitary life means nothing, because you know that once you get into power, you can rewrite the story about how that person died. Yeah. Why do we no longer hear about Baby Pendo as an example?
Crazy.
You know, so for them, the power they might in their personal lives value life, but as people who are looking for power, they know that they have the ability to rewrite the story. So the power itself is actually the tool. It's like the Holy Grail, or Thanos's 5 stones, or whatever analogy you want to use. So what do we do when we look for power? How do we then now go and characterize our story when once we get it? Yeah. So that's how I'd look at it.
If we shift gears to Kenyan corruption.
I love the way you breathed out.
John, let me tell you, if you start thinking about the stuff that goes on in this country,
you'll go mad.
Without even going, because as a Pan-African, I have a global African race point of view of everything I look, whether it's economics or social or political or education, anything. As a Pan-Africanist, I always look at anything from a Pan-African eye. But just looking at Kenya, I haven't even gone to Uganda, that's having an election very soon, and you see what's happening with Bobby Wine. I haven't even looked at Tanzania. I haven't looked at South Africa. I haven't looked at Nigeria with Trump saying that he's going to go guns blazing. Like when you start looking at black issues, man, you just like, for me, I can never ever go tired. But sometimes you just breathe heavy. You're like, where do I
mean, it can get discouraging. It can get discouraging, but again, the benefit of time, and I'm not saying that I've lived long enough to fully even appreciate this, but the benefit of time is that you start to see things shifting in ways that are unexpected. I'll give you an example. Aliko Dangote, the richest man on the continent, is right now taking out advertisements, lambasting civil servants about like deep corruption in Nigeria that is preventing him from running his refinery business. It's an extraordinary thing to look at, right? Because here is a man who you would assume has all of the wealth and power to have things go their way. But he still exists in a system where he can be frustrated by one person or by one system. This is the richest man in Africa. So what does it tell you about the need to build better systems, build better governance? That no matter how rich you are, no matter how powerful you are, no matter how long it takes for you to build this wealth that you're building for yourself, if you're building it and everybody around you is poor and your government is corrupt, one day kitakuramba. One day. This is Aliko Dangote, right? And I'm not trying to overemphasize it because he's a superhuman man, but it's just that he's rich. He's rich. Like he's rich, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at that, then there's this lawyer. I even retweeted what he said. James Wanjeri. He's like, it's funny how corruption will turn you into an activist, right? Once it affects you. But I wish that more people across every demographic and every divide recognized what the benefit is of living in a country where this is not the story for even the smallest person, right? And that for me is the story, even before we talk about corruption. That for me is a story, right? You will never be able to outrun the disease of corruption if it is systemic. You'll never be able to outrun it. You think that you might because you have you have dual citizenship and a business class ticket out of Kenya. But you're going to a country where you have no roots, you have no, you understand? You think that you're outrunning corruption, but really what you're doing is just creating a buffer. Kuna siku moja, when that A to go and have a smocha, you know, fikia ziu, or when you, in spite of your wealth, are told that you're a dirty little nigger or something like that. A friend of mine texted me the other day and we were talking about this and he was like, man, I was 19 in Switzerland and some guy called me a dirty little nigger and I'm like 19. And you always think that you'll be ready for those kinds of moments. You'll slap the guy, right? Corruption exposes everybody who lives within that system to some sort of indignity, and it'll always find you. Always, right? It has stayed undefeated, right? The Duvaliers of Haiti and all of these people, even them, they lived through all of these things. So, you be corrupt today, your children will suffer, you know, or their children. It always happens.
The system. And I like what you said. When I was in school, by the way, when I was in high school, and I think our teacher, I don't know if he was an English teacher, he was just telling us about corruption and who stole what. And my friends, I was in high school. My friends were telling me, hey, hata mi nikifika hapo pia mi nitaiba. So you see that it's a vicious cycle. It's a vicious cycle. So even me, when I get to to the position where I have all this money, at my disposal, I'll also do what the person before me did.
But you see, this is like a perfect reflection of understanding why, for instance, violence happens, especially within communities that are poor, because the violence itself is a symptom, and by violence I'm also including corruption, because corruption is its own kind of violence, right? Like, or rather, let me not put it that way. So let's talk about violence for a moment. So like violence and robbery and what have you are products of an economic system that creates the climate for that violence to take place, right? So if you hear a person saying that his aspiration is to be just as corrupt as the next person, it's because he sees no path. He sees no path to be able to gainfully, but to be able to get gainfully employed in a legal way, right? Like many people don't see that path. Yeah, there are people who are truly just evil and just want to steal, right? But then you then now ask yourself, so then if that person sees that as their future, why do they see that as their future? Because when they see many of the people who get into parliament, coming in as paupers, and the next couple of years they are rich, like, and the politics that they are used to is that of handouts. Oh, nipe leso, nipe unga, nipe hii, that you want to be in that position where at least your problem is that I don't have maybe 1,000, bales of unga to give. I only have 900. Lakini niko na do, right? And to become internally coherent, another thing that I've heard by listening to these interwebs. When you become internally coherent and you start to like make sense of your life in a way that these things might affect you but don't direct you, then your country starts to change. And this is why things like education in countries or systems where there's like corruption are very bad, right? Like the education system is bad because it's meant to keep you in a state of crisis, in a state of anxiety about your next meal, in a state of dependence, right? So don't just see corruption for the act, see it for the intention. Yeah. And what is the intention of corruption in a system like ours? It's to maintain a certain order of things and to maintain a place where you don't have a person who is aware, conscious enough to then ask the right questions, to then, brave as many days out on the street, or write as many letters, or petition their parliamentarians, or vote in the right way and ensure that the people that they vote in are accountable. You don't have a large number of those people. You have people who are moved and swayed by the growl in their stomach, right? And you can't ignore that. You can never ignore the hunger pangs of yourself or your children, or the fact that your house is leaking, or that you don't have a house. It'll make you a perfect candidate for the recipient to be the recipient of corrupt goods, and then now you feel complicit. Kama mimi pia nilikula hiyo unga na najua yule mtu ni mwizi, basi mimi pia ni mwizi. Like it does something to the psychology of the person, right? So if I'm complicit, I might as well then climb that ladder and become the top don, and let me be the one, dishing out. So this is the weird effect that corruption has. And so when you see it becoming bigger and bigger and more unabated, then, we know that we have a crisis. We'll never really eliminate corruption from our society, because part of human nature is selfish. But what we can do is recognize what these demons are and create a system where it becomes more difficult for these demons to fester. Goes back to that. Maybe I'm just talking bullshit here, but I think that I'm onto something.
Yeah. Well, because I know you have been through everything. You've seen everything. There's nothing you don't know.
Well, I've seen
John.
some things, but I haven't seen everything. There's still a lot that
you have covered terrorism. You've covered corruption. You've covered election. Corruption. You've covered and like you. So I think when you say that, it can never. Like when you say that it's going to be hard. Yeah, it's going to be hard because you can't change people, but you can change a system. So
Sorry, go ahead.
So what is because for me, I've always said that we need a system, and now tech has gone a long way. I mean, if Kenya, we pride ourselves into Safaricom and M-Pesa and all those things. If we can be one of the pioneers, if not the pioneers of money transfer, mobile money transfer, why can't we make a system that everything? Because procurement is where corruption resides. Procurement is where corruption resides, in health, in whatever. Why can't we make a stringent, strict system that nobody, however you try, nobody can steal?
Because fighting corruption doesn't just require technical ability. It also requires a certain kind of consciousness that that requires more internal work than it does in external, right? It requires people to really ask questions of themselves, as we say in Swahili, kujiita mkutano, right? And and like, here's an example, right? We thought that the cure to theft in elections was to make those elections was technology. So you have biometric voter registration, electronic voter identification, seeing the results on the board and what have you. But did it stop theft? It didn't stop theft because stopping theft requires an internal work that we just haven't yet fully done. But again, this is why last year's protests were important. Last year I was invited, this year actually, I was invited to give a lecture. And the title of my lecture was, what was it? It was Souls on Fire, right? I later used that for a documentary that I published. And I was trying to say that the battle that we saw was, yes, a battle for the finance bill, but in many ways it was a battle for the soul of Kenya, right? It was a generation asking people to really reflect and say that, you know, the center can no longer hold. We have to do the internal work of asking ourselves, who are we as a country? Is this what we want for ourselves? Right? Is this, and the trigger might have been the finance bill, but it was an invitation for that kind of internal work to be done. And again, when your stomach is growling, when you're hungry, when your roads aren't fixed, when your kids can't go to school, or when the quality of their education is poor, it's very hard to have that, you know. But here we have a generation of young people who are promised something and they can tell that the promise is a lie, and they're asking themselves, well, why? What about my future? Yeah. And this is the internal work that needed to be done. So to answer your question, of course we could build better systems, trustless systems that allow for us to track a vote from sun up to sunset, right? But what if someone says, no, me, I don't agree, and I'm going to use my goons to ensure that I stay in power? What do? Privatized violence is already a thing, right? It already is a thing. So what they're telling you is that no matter what you do, we will create a system that will counter yours, that is more powerful or more scary than yours, and beat you into submission. But are you internally coherent enough to say that, no, the thing that I need is not for you to give me unga. It's for you to fix my water. It's for you to fix the things that are going wrong in my community. And it's for you to ensure that every day that you go and pass laws, or every day you step into the executive, you are doing things that are in my interest and in my neighbor's interest and in my community's interest. It takes that kind of thinking, even at a minuscule level. But I'm confident that Kenyans are able to do this. Even those people who are hungry, even those people who are faced with crises that they've never faced before. But it will take all of us, including those people in whose immediate interest it isn't to fight corruption. Those guys who are fine, those guys who can fuel the cars and go and shop and fill up their shopping carts and say, inflation is bad, but you know, inflation is bad. Let me change the brand of my unga or of my oil, but in Kosawa. It'll take those guys as well. It takes all of us. But if we don't do it, if we don't do it, it'll become more and more difficult. And eventually, if enough people check out from a system, then what happens? The system collapses, and then what do you have? A failed state. There are very many examples of states that are close to failure across the continent. There are.
Yeah.
You know, when you see military juntas being coming into power into West Africa, it's not that the military thinks that it's more powerful, etc. There's a need, there's an unction coming from the ground saying, man, we don't trust these politicians. Afadhali, we trust the man with the gun. That's why they're cheered for in the streets when they go into power. Right? So anyway, I mean, it's the madness of a nation disturbing the solitary mind. I don't know. I don't know what's going on, but we definitely need to think.
You know what came into my mind, John, is you have covered a lot of stories, and till this day, even the truths that we've talked about right now, you still are not scared. Like, and let me tell you, I used to be scared for your life. Like, I used to watch you on Inside Story, with Ohad, and even the Westgate story. That was interesting. And with the Dusit, I mean, have you ever been? Is there a story that you were like, woof? I thank God that I left there alive.
Yeah, Dusit. That was a crazy day. It was a crazy day. It was a crazy afternoon. I remember just before my phone died, my mom called me while I was there, and we were sort of sheltering under the eaves of one of the shops. And as I was on my phone with her, like one of the police fired at a building, and it was really loud. Pa, 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 pa. I could hear the panic on her voice, just as the phone went dead, right? But I'd say it was scary because I don't think I've ever been in a situation like that where you don't know where the violence is going to come from. You don't know what is ahead of you. That was the thing about it, was that it was more like the anticipation that guy could be lurking around the corner, covering protests, by comparison is different because you kind of always know where the stones are going to come from, where the gunfire is going to come from. So unaweza jipanga. But in a situation where you don't know whether something is booby-trapped, like I remember there was a time when we entered one of the buildings, and we were filming behind the police, and then one of the police shouted grenade, and we all we ran out of there, and indeed there was an exploded grenade, and we were packed in there, 20, 30 guys, cameras, guns, people being taken out of the building and being taken to safety. What if that thing had gone off? So it was a very scary day for me. It was. But yeah, man, I don't know, these days I don't like to talk so much about past stories, about that I've done. Yeah.
No, I would think because I would think that you would say the Al-Shabaab story. Like,
I mean, it was scary for you to watch. For us, it was like, there were a few times that it was scary, but like a moment, nah, Dusit was really, really insanely. I mean, there were others like earlier, but like I said, when you're in enough of those situations, you tend to build like a sense of how to move, etc. Like there was a time we went down to the docks in Mombasa. We were doing a story about drugs way back, and like there were like junkies shooting up, and they were all over, and those, someone with a wild look in their eyes, and they're like, hey, this guy akiniuma, I might get tuberculosis, marasmus, kwashoko, and also like like the kind of things that go through your mind, and that was scary, right? But then you do enough of those, you tend to sort of like build a mental map of how you're able to move. Yeah, but hey, man, Orina. Anyway, this is why I don't like talking about the experience, because I can't really, or I don't like anymore to rank those experiences, because I think people are living through far scarier things, and I'm a very privileged journalist to not only have walked away from those things, but even when there were situations where things were dangerous, to have people who were willing to stand up for me and to protect me. Yeah. There are some brave guys out there who are going out with a phone and going into like situations where, like, would I do that? Yeah.
Well, I always say you're a Kenyan statesman, like in a way that the stories you did, they were not just entertaining to watch on news, on TV, but they opened our eyes. Like the Westgate one, to me, that's my favorite, because we saw what really happened. Like, and you went deep, and even, I mean, that was, to me, that was the one. That and the Al Shabaab one was one. I'm like, hey, now John, who you? This guy, I hope he's keeping himself safe. But I'm happy that you have lived to tell the tale.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. No one is happier than me. I can promise you that.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
You and Moha, and I know Moha is in politics now, but either way, the things that you two have like, do you still talk to Moha, by the way?
Yeah, I do. I mean, we text now and again. It's not as frequent as it used to be when we'd work together. But yeah, we text, we talk, we call one another.
Man, I don't know if we'll get a dynamic duo again, but I don't know.
I'll say this: the thing that I'm proudest of being part of Uncensored is that I've can say that I've been a part of, or have opened the door for a good number of very good journalists to begin flourishing, not even just within the Uncensored stable, but elsewhere, and that, interestingly, that's the thing that gives me a lot more joy these days. A lot. Like, so we have this thing called campus tours. Interestingly, I've never been on one personally, but Uncensored has done a bunch of them. And when I get back, that's one of the things that I'm going to be doing a lot of, just going around to different campuses, talking to early career journalists or people who are thinking about getting into media. It's really exciting to see how a person like kind of transforms as they go through the career, through the profession, from when they're young, like wide-eyed interns, and then they get their first story, and how exciting it is, their first story, and then they tweet, or they really push, and then they get into this phase where they're like jaded and they're like, oh man, everything is wrong, we must fight, and and then other phases, and it's almost like me reliving my career through their rise. But more than that, it's really edifying to be a part of a person living their dream as a journalist. So those are the things that I'd be most excited. So the next time we talk, maybe ask me about the people I'm proudest of.
And by the way, Africa, you guys are doing a great job. I saw the Seed Syndicate. Like I'm a fan. I've been a fan of Africans for so long. I think this Seed Syndicate one is the one that did it for me. Yeah, I think it's the best story you've done.
There's another one that's coming out. Today's the 17th, right? So there's one coming out today on this story behind carbon credits and what looks like an attempt to grab land. So yeah, you can tell your audiences to watch out for that. It's called Carbon Colony, so check that out. Check that one out.
Well, John, as we close, I have only one question for you. Then you can give your last one.
Yeah.
You see us, I like calling this space online independent media, because what Sell Afrika to Africans really is, it's a online independent Pan-African media platform.
Yeah.
So what do you have to say for people like us who are trying? I wouldn't say we are doing it the way you have done it for the past 20 years, but what words of encouragement would you like to give young independent guys who are really trying to show the truth in their own independent way?
I think to keep doing it and to remember that even as you continue to push it, it's also very important to be factual, right? Like, be truthful, be honest, be factual, right? Because facts will save you when everything else falls. The other thing that I'll say is that I love how much content there is now that's kind of rewriting our past, and retelling it actually. And I also get surprised about some of the things that I find, and you're like, I thought I knew my history, and yet I don't. But to remember that societies, civilizations, all of them are built on in large part, the power of the narrative that they can build around themselves. And narratives aren't just shaped by one or two individuals, it's shaped by very many people, especially in this day and age. And Africa needs that. Africa needs to hear about itself from itself. And so I'm glad that you're doing it. I'd say the next step of the fight is for us to be able to do it on platforms that we own, right? So that, some of these people from these algorithmic empires don't just come and change the algorithm and say, we're tired of hearing from these guys, let's deprioritize this content. But like for people like you who are doing this thing, I'd say keep doing it, man. Like, it can be lonely work, but the beauty about being in this narrative world, I say it a lot of journalism. I can't even remember who said this first to me, but I colonized the saying, like, sometimes journalism and even now storytelling can be a spark, right? Like it lights a fire somewhere in someone's mind or in people's consciousness. But there'll be times when it's a library, and a library is a reservoir of knowledge, which may not necessarily be the thing that will be, out there gaining virality, but it'll be there for the people who are looking and the people who are really searching for the truth. So either way, your work matters. So just keep doing it, man, and keep telling that story, man. It's we all need to hear it. We all need to hear it. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And you see the way people are saying legacy media is almost dying, and these independent spaces are coming up. Is that really a good thing as we close? Because for me, like, it works for me. It works for me. It works for Africa Uncensored. But for a person who has worked in legacy media for 20 years, like, what do you think? What do you think?
I'd say that there's parts of legacy media that ought to die, and those parts are the ones that sort of like position themselves as these very central, as being central to agenda shaping, and then selling that space to people who then use those platforms for their own goals. We've seen that a lot with politicians. I'd say that it's not a good thing for that kind of infrastructure to just die, because at the end of the day, yes, it might be a contest for numbers and for figures, but that contest pales in comparison to the work and the space, for this work that needs to be created. There's space for everybody, and legacy media is important. And I think, that legacy media ought to be seen for it's important. What we need to do is just call legacy media to be more attuned to the needs of the people that they serve. Once that happens, I think everything else will follow. So no, in as much as I work in independent media now, I don't think that it's a good thing for legacy media to die. I'm not that nihilistic. I think those institutions matter, and as long as those institutions are made for the right things, fine. But if they're not serving the purpose that they need to, then burn, baby, burn, right?
Burn, baby, burn. Thank you so much for coming, John Allan Namu. Please give us your final word. But before you do that, let me give my final word. Let me just give you your flowers and say that you are the best journalist I've ever seen, and I think Kenyans can say that John Allan Namu is the guy. You're the guy.
Then you haven't seen many journalists. You need to see.
No. You're the guy. I know you know this, but from a fan standpoint, whenever Jichopego and Inside Story, like people were glued. Like news was like watching Prison Break or watching your favorite TV show or something. Like you were glued because news is basically you watch the first 3 items. It was like because you know when Prison Break was like the hottest show.
Yeah.
You see? So he was like,
oh my god,
he was so he was so entertaining, especially the Al Shabaab story.
Yeah.
I mean, so for me, I just want to give you your flowers and say that you really like made news really like I don't want to say entertaining, but you made it. You really glued us to the TV, and you made us want to know more.
I'm glad.
So that even the person who didn't go to school was watching your story, you and Moha, and they were like they understood everything from top to bottom. You see that?
Yeah.
So and you're still continuing to do that with Africa Uncensored. So please, I just want to give you your flowers and say thank you.
Much appreciated, man.
Keep on.
Thank you. So when does this one come out? Thank you. I appreciate that, man.
So this one will come out probably after, if not Monday, probably 29th. Yeah, 29th. Okay. It'll come out. Please give your last word before we close the show.
All right, then if it's coming out at that time, then I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to everybody who's followed the work that we've done at Africa Uncensored, who's followed my career, follow Rina, obviously. And happy holidays. Have a happy new year. May 2026 be the year, maybe your year, whatever that means, right? But may you, especially as a Kenyan and an African, continue to look at this continent with the eyes of a dreamer, but with like the purpose of a builder, right? Like just remember that we mean something to one another, and this place that we call our home really means a lot to a lot of us. So keep doing what you can to build this continent. All right, peace.
Peace. And when you come back to Kenya, please holler at me. We do this because we have so much to talk about. Yeah, we do it live.
All right, I'll also call you to one of my shows. Thank you, man. Nice meeting you.
No problem. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes. Have a good evening, man.